I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Well, welcome back, and what a delight. I've been waiting for this conversation for quite some time. What an honor for us to have with us today Chris Mitchell. You probably see him on the Dove television network. He hosts the CBN program called Jerusalem Dateline. He is the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News. He's authored several books, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And we're Skyping him in today. In fact, I'll be honest with you folks. I'm not a selfie person. I don't take selfies. I took my first selfie with Chris at the NRB. So good to see you, Chris. How you doing?
It's good to see you, Perry. Great to see you now, or be with you since the NRB.
Yeah, good to see you. Well, listen, are you in Jerusalem now? Where are you? Or at CBN?
Well, I'm in the CBN studio here in Jerusalem.
Okay. Hey, great. Thank you for being with us. Well, the Iran nuclear deal, what's your take and how do you see it?
Well, I kind of agree with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that said it was a historic mistake. I think a lot of people over here think it's a catastrophic deal. It sets up Iran for a nuclear device, whether it's in probably several years. It seems like it's going to do that. It legitimizes Iran's right to enrich uranium, which gives them legitimacy that they hadn't had before. It allows them to have a number of centrifuges, over 6,000, to continue enriching uranium, even though at a smaller percentage. And I think, Perry, one of the main things I think it does, well, I'll mention two. First of all, it allows Iran to lift up the sanctions and have maybe more than $100 billion in their coffers. And what they can do, the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, can fund their campaigns in Syria, propping up Syrian President Bashar Assad. They can rearm Hezbollah, Hamas. They can continue their proxy war with the Houthis in Yemen against Saudi Arabia. And it really pits up, in many ways, this Shiite, the Iranians, against the Sunni nations and Israel here in the Middle East.
I heard Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's response yesterday, short and very stern. You have any idea why we did this? It seems like we betrayed Israel again.
It's a great question, Perry. I'm not sure why we did this. And I know a lot of people have speculated that President Obama wants a legacy. One thing it really does, and it's something that's a really profound shift here in the Middle East, it shifts American-U.S. policy towards Shiite Iran for the first time ever. I mean, the Iranian Republic was established in 1979, and it's been probably the #1 enemy of the United States since then. But what President Obama has done is shifted onto the Iranian side against traditional allies of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And what we see now happening, Perry, is actually a very unprecedented alliance between the Sunni nations, Saudi Arabia in particular, and Israel. And I think they're going to present a united front. They're sort of on the same page, opposing a Shiite Iran that wants to have hegemony in the Middle East. And now with the possibility of a nuclear device, it really sets up, I think, not a peaceful situation, but a potential warlike scenario.
So this could set up an interesting debate at the UN, if we find these strange coalitions, right?
Very strange coalitions. And one other point about the United Nations, Perry, is the fact that, the Congress right now has got 60 days to review this deal. And but what's happening, too, with the deal, it allows the United Nations to lift their sanctions, the EU, the European Union, to lift their sanctions. And even if the U.S. Congress votes against this deal and it sustains a presidential veto, which he's already promised, it looks like the horses have already left the barn in terms of the sanctions and the ability of Iran to reinvigorate their economy and fund all their sponsors of terror around the Middle East.
Does Israel feel betrayed?
I think they do. And I think all along for the last couple of years during these negotiations, I feel like they haven't had the ear, I guess, of the Obama administration. It seems like there was a lot of comments here in the last several months about the negotiations as they were going on. It was actually accusations that Israel was spying on the negotiations because they really weren't included and they weren't getting enough information from the United States negotiators. I think there is a sense of betrayal, and a sense right now of a confrontation even greater than there has been in the last several years between the Obama administration and the government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The Prime Minister yesterday in his speech, I think, made it pretty clear, we'll go at it alone. I mean, in other words, he said, this did not include us. We are not bound by this. We will defend ourselves. Is that correct?
I think it's very correct, and I think they've said that all along, that they wouldn't be bound by a bad deal, and I think they've said all along that they retained all options, and that would include a military option. And one interesting thing about this alliance, this potential alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel, is that, perhaps Saudi Arabia, I mean, this is sort of this is a plausible scenario that they could use Saudi Arabian airspace to potentially, strike Iran right now. And so just a few weeks ago, actually just last month, the beginning of June, there was an unprecedented public meeting between a representative of Israel and a representative of Saudi Arabia. And they said at that meeting that there had been 5 private meetings prior to their public meeting. And so setting up this Israel-Saudi relationship is really unprecedented. Strange bedfellows in the Middle East, but these are very strange days.
Chris, explain to our viewers and listeners why Saudi would do this. Why would the Saudis do this? What's their fear and what's their interest?
Well, there's a huge schism between Islam, and that's represented by Shiite Iran, and that's the main country that follows Shiite Islam. And Saudi Arabia is sort of the main country that follows Sunni Islam. And you have to go back to the beginning of Islam to realize why the difference is. And what the difference is fairly simple, is that they disagreed back about 1,400 years ago after Muhammad the Prophet died. And the Shiites believed what should happen is that the successor to Muhammad should come from his family lineage. The Sunnis, on the other hand, believe that the successor to Muhammad should come from the Ummah, or the Islamic community. And ever since then, there's been that disagreement. It goes so far as to believe that the Shiites believe that the Sunnis are actually heretics. And so that's why both Shiite Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia are bitter rivals and enemies. And so so even though they both consider themselves Muslims, one side and the other consider each other heretics and the true followers of Muhammad. And that's why this is set up, this rivalry is set up right there in the Middle East.
I think we forget that, Chris, sometimes, that there's a civil war going amongst the Muslims themselves, and it's an interesting one, to say the least. So I guess if there is a Saudi-Israeli coalition, wow.
Oh, exactly. I mean, these are unusual days that we're setting up, and I think, Perry, we're going to see even more unusual things happening in the weeks, months to come. It almost feels like, put your seatbelts on, and we're going to see what happens here.
How are things up in Kurdistan?
Well, that's a great question, because right now the Kurds in Kurdistan, they seem to be making some headway against ISIS, the Syrian Kurds, that is. The Iraqi Kurds are holding the line against this. And you mentioned the book that I've written, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And right now, the Kurds are holding the line there. It's almost 600 miles long against ISIS. And right now, Iran's been taking the headlines for the last couple of days, obviously. But one of the other major battles going on is ISIS. And they have actually, in the last year or so, since we were up there, consolidated a lot of their power in Syria and Iraq. They control land about the size of England, and they're enforcing what's such a barbaric form, this medieval form of Islam that is killing children, killing women, putting women into slavery, and ravaging every ethnic group that they can find, whether they're Christians, Yazidis, or others. It's really an awful tragedy going on right there in the Middle East.
All right, before I take a break here, Chris, where can people get your book?
Well, they can get the book at DestinationJerusalemBook.com and also Amazon.com. And just briefly, I wrote the book to help people understand who ISIS is, why, what's happening to Christians in the Middle East, and how they can prepare for the days ahead.
All right, let me take a quick break here. We come back. I want you to kind of give us a little bit of a Jerusalem update. Any missiles still coming across the fence? All right, let me be right back with Chris Mitchell in just a moment. Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Chris Mitchell. Of course, you see him here on the Dove Television Network. He is the Middle East Bureau Chief for CBN News in Jerusalem. In fact, we're Skyping him in there from the CBN News headquarters there in Jerusalem. He heads up Jerusalem Dateline, a program you see on the Dove TV. He's the author of his new book called Destination Jerusalem, ISIS Convert or Die, Christian Persecution and Preparing for the Days Ahead. And let me encourage you to get a copy of that book. And one other little quick thing here, Chris, you have blogs that are there at the cbn.com, is that right?
We have what, Perry?
Blogs, your blog?
Oh, yes, we have a blog as well. It's called Jerusalem Dateline as well. Twitter at Chris, CBN News. And so we get out there on Facebook as well.
Okay, great. Well, give us an update, Chris. What's happening in Israel? It's been a little quiet. At least we haven't heard much over here in the West. Are they still dodging missiles over there?
Well, there have been a few missiles coming out of the Gaza Strip in the last couple of months, but there have been just a few. Unlike last year about this time, there was a 50-day war between Hamas and Israel. So I think right now it's fairly quiet. Hamas was really devastated during that war, and they lost most of their missile arsenal. So, but so far it's been quiet. I doubt there be any disturbances like there were about a year ago on the southern border. On the northern border, Hezbollah has about 100,000 rockets possibly aimed at Israel. Right now, Hezbollah has been fairly occupied right now with their battle ongoing in Syria, trying to prop up the Syrian regime of Bashar Assad. The main thing right now, I think, is Iran's nuclear program, and I think that's dominating the attention here in Israel, among the political leaders, among the military staff as well. I think that's the number one threat that they have said for years, and now with this deal, it just exacerbates exponentially the threat they feel from the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Has that united the Knesset? I mean, are they more with Netanyahu these days than against him?
It really has, and I think across the political spectrum, from left to right, they find unanimity about this threat. In fact, Itzhak Herzog, which is the opposition leader to the government right now, he met with Netanyahu last night, and I think, as he said on a BBC interview yesterday, there's really no daylight between him and Netanyahu about the Iranian threat, and I think they all feel, the leadership as well as Israelis, that Iran is Israel's number one threat, and they're going to be united about that.
So, Chris, if the Saudis and Israel, they come together with the coalition and they're able to get the airspace cleared in case Israel wants to go in, they have to fly over them to get in there. Let's hypothetically say they go in and make a strike to take out some nuclear installations. They have to worry about the other borders at the same time. I mean, it's not just one strike. I mean, their guard has to be up all the way around the real estate.
Oh, it does, and that's why I mentioned Hezbollah on the northern border. So if Israel decides that they need to have a military strike against Iran, Hezbollah, which is their proxy in Lebanon, they could start firing some of those 100,000 rockets against Israel. And so they could be facing a multi-front war if they really feel like they need to take a military decision. The other thing this does, Perry, it really pits Israel against the United States and much of the world powers. They're a bit isolated now because of this deal. You have all 5 permanent members of the United Nations signing off on this deal, including, in addition to Germany. And so if Israel ever does feel like they, for its own survival, strike against Iran, it really puts them fairly isolated against the rest of the world. We do have this unusual alliance, perhaps, between some of these Sunni nations, but the rest of the world might come against Israel.
What's the average Israeli feeling these days? Are they nervous? Are they tense? Do they get it?
Oh, they certainly get it, and they certainly take Iran seriously when they say death to America and death to Israel. And I think they see that they believe that what Iran says, they believe what Iran says when they say that Israel is the little Satan, but they also say that America is the great Satan. They certainly get it. I've been here almost 15 years, Perry, and I've seen that the Israeli people are quite resilient, and they've gone through Intifada, they've gone through a Second Lebanon War in 2006, 4 campaigns down with Hamas on the Gaza border. They're quite resilient, and I think they look at the long view. And many people do believe in the God of Israel, and so they feel like God will protect them.
Wow. So, am I hearing you say that the only potential, and it would be somewhat at arm's length, ally that Israel has at the moment is Saudi Arabia?
Well, it seems like they're the closest neighbor that shares a common enemy with Israel, and so there are other people. And in fact, Canada, I believe, just the other day said that they were going to take all the Iranian diplomats and send them home, and they were going to break relations with Iran. So that was an encouraging step. And I think, Perry, people also need to understand, people in the United States, that one thing that this deal didn't do was it did not deal with Iran's ballistic missile program. They have a robust missile program, and they have missiles right now that can easily reach Israel. So they don't need an intercontinental ballistic missile to reach Israel, but they can use an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, to reach the United States. And so when they say death to America, they mean that too. And so I think people in the United States need to realize that this is not just an Israeli issue. It's really an American issue as well. It's really a world issue because Iran has an idea. They want to not only have a hegemony here in the Middle East, they have global ambitions, and they really feel like they've been destined to take their brand of Islam, Shiite Islam, throughout the world.
It appears, Chris, that as we now see this deal as it unfolds, that the president may have done his biggest anti-Semitic move in his administration yet by keeping Israel out of the deal, making a deal that certainly doesn't even begin to include or respect or defend Israel. Does the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, does he understand that the faith community in America is with him for the most part?
I think he does. I think they have seen, he and many of the Israeli political leaders have seen, a wellspring of support from the Christian community, groups like Christians United for Israel, ICEJ, International Christian Embassy for Jerusalem, CBN. I think they see that as Dove TV, and the whole evangelical community in the United States. I think they very much see as supporters, and I think they distinguish between the Obama administration and what they have done, what actions they have done, and the Christian community in the United States. And I also feel like they see allies on Capitol Hill, a number of Republicans and Democrats as well, who see that they want to stand with the Jewish state. One other thing I'd like to add, Perry, is that, Israel in many ways feels isolated, and we seem to be coming up to days that I would describe with 2 authors. One, it said, Charles Dickens said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The prophet Isaiah said, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you, and deep darkness the peoples. With the rise of ISIS, with this deal with Iran, we see really darkness creeping over the whole earth. And yet there are bright spots. We talk about that in the book. There are more Muslims coming to faith in Jesus Christ now than at any time in the 1400-year history of Islam. And many of them are coming through supernatural dreams and visions. We've met a number of them, and we talk about some of those stories in the book. And so we see remarkable things. We see great light. We do see this great darkness, but we also see great light. And I think that's an encouraging thing in our time.
Thank you, Chris, for bringing that up. And I just want to encourage our viewers and listeners, check out his book. You need to get this because just that issue alone, you need to read about it. Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead. So you've been able to document some of these. We've been hearing bits and pieces of it. Joel Rosenberg, yourself, others have mentioned that there has been literally miraculous intervention among Muslims. They're waking up after a dream, seeing Jesus as the Messiah, knowing immediately that it could cost them their life and execution, or certainly excommunication from their family. But it is happening, right?
It is happening, and one of the most exciting things I've had is to be able to meet a number of them. And I'll give you an example that we do talk about in the book. In a city in central Turkey, you go down a narrow alley and go up to a sort of a rundown apartment, and it's a home church for many Iranian believers who have fled Iran into Turkey to get asylum. And we interviewed a number of these people, and most everyone we talked to had come to faith through a dream or vision. And they have a vibrant faith. For example, we were watching a baptism. They took a large industrial plastic tub, they cut a hole in it, and they used that for their baptismal. And we watched several baptisms, and people just shouted and cheered and clapped, and they were just so excited. And so even though they didn't have much of anything in the physical sense, they had a vibrant faith. And one other thing I'd like to add, Perry, is that, right now there's also heroic stories of faith under fire. And I can plug another book by a friend, Tom Doyle. He talks about killing Christians and about faith in the midst of where it's very hard to believe. He told us a story just a little while ago about 10 leaders in Damascus who had to make a decision. They prayed and fasted about whether or not they were going to stay in Damascus because it was getting so dangerous. They came back a week later after they all fasted and prayed. Instead of the 10, there were 25 who came, and they all decided to stay. And the one thing they did was they gathered money to buy a plot of land. And the plot of land, Perry, was to be their own cemetery so they could bury each other. And they decided that they would face death so that they could stay and be a witness for Jesus Christ. And that's the kind of heroic stories that are going on in the Middle East right now.
Whoa, what a story. These dreams and vision, Chris, is the central theme Jesus, the Messiah?
Oh, exactly. And they recognize that many times he identifies himself as Jesus. And often it's not necessarily they wake up and become a Christian, but they might see a satellite program. They might meet somebody in person. There's even been dreams where they would, people have been told to go to a market and they'll meet somebody and there'll just be this divine encounter with a fellow believer. And so that is happening over and over. In fact, Iran, despite this nuclear deal, is actually one of the fastest growing churches in the world right now. Obviously, it's underground, but these things are happening over and over. And I just think it builds our faith in the West to hear these kind of testimonies of how the Holy Spirit, Jesus himself, is appearing to Muslim people literally throughout the Islamic world.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Back to the Prime Minister just for a moment. We've got about 2 minutes left here. He was educated in the United States. He raised most of his money in Christian churches in the United States for his election. He understands Bible prophecy. Does he think does he think he's a part of it?
I think he certainly feels he's part of history. One thing we talk about in the book, in November of 2013, we had the opportunity to go with Netanyahu up to Moscow to visit Vladimir Putin. At the time, he wanted to convince Putin not to sign what was then an interim agreement with Iran. He failed in that, but we had the opportunity in a background briefing with all the other journalists on the trip to talk to Netanyahu. And I had this question to ask him, and I was able to ask him, did he feel sort of like Churchill was in the 1930s, when Churchill was a voice in the wilderness railing against Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler? And he said he was. He felt like he was the similar voice talking about the dangers of a nuclear Iran. And I think he feels called in history, and perhaps he feels called by the Lord. He didn't say that exactly, but he did feel that he was responsible for the continuation of the Jewish people, and that he was called for such a time as this to stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you for what you do. And what time of day is it over there?
Right now it's about 7 o'clock, so it's not too bad.
Oh, okay, good. Thanks for what you do and putting your own self on the line like that. And all of you folks there at CBN, you do a wonderful job. This is an amazing time. And I guess now you're going to just watch and see how this thing unfolds. I don't know if we have enough at the moment to override a president veto. Yesterday they said we may have. There are some Democrats in the House and the Senate said no, we don't like this deal. Wouldn't it be interesting if the UN says yes and the American Congress says no?
It would be very interesting, and I think I actually hope the U.S. Congress does vote no, because I think they need to go on record in history that they would oppose this deal. And one last thing, Perry, I think we do live in interesting times, and in the book I talk about things that we can do to prepare for these days, and one of the first things is to watch and pray, so we could all do that right now. It's certainly a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem as well.
All right, thank you, friend. God bless you. Thanks for your time. Again, the book, Destination Jerusalem, ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution and Preparing for the Days Ahead. Thanks, Chris. Look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you, Perry. Great to be with you.
All right, God bless you. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.